Welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program episode, and today is the day we go to Doudna. We've been talking about it for a few episodes, so let's get to it. First thing we need to do is upgrade our VAB and our launch pad. This rocket's going to be too big for the level 2 ones. It's going to be a lot bigger than what we've been building. Let's go ahead and get to it. Now, before we get to this build, I wanted to kind of let you know that this particular transfer ship I'm going to set up, or show you guys how to set up, is overkill for Doudna. In fact, this can pretty much get anywhere in the Kerbal system, except for Elu, and it's very getting to Dres. It's very close getting to Dres. And then Moho has a little bit of issues with as well, but Eve, Jewel, all the moons, Doudna, it can do all of those. This is a pretty good universal ship, and it gives a lot of room for error, which is really nice, especially if you're a newer player. Now, the lander, you can kind of design how you want to. I'm going with the 2-seat lander because I want to send Jeb and Bob both down. You're going to want to have a scientist with you when you do this because the amount of science you can get from this journey is insane. We almost clear 4,000 units of science by the end of all of this. So I would recommend doing some kind of variant or some kind of 2-seater pod. This one's a little bit bigger than my typical landers. I've been using this one a lot more lately just for that 2-seating option, and that is a slightly newer crew cab, and I've kind of started to fall in love with it, but that's besides the point. If you follow this build, you have way more Delta V than you need to actually just do Doudna. In fact, we do Doudna and Ike on what fuel we have in that cab. I would recommend, before doing these 3 tanks before the nuclear stage, throwing another small tank in there for a fuel reserve for the lander, just in case you want to do some biome hopping, or just in case you burn a little more fuel than I do during this mission. My ascent from Doudna wasn't very efficient just because the engine we were using isn't as powerful as I'd like it to be. So I fly pretty aggressively going vertical just to get out of that first layer of atmosphere so the thrust to weight can kind of kick up a little bit. You don't have to do it that way. It's just how I like to do it. It's just a personal preference for me. You can actually do any type of descent profile you want to get off Doudna. This thing has enough fuel for it. In fact, we're going to make a quick change. We're going to do the side boosters, those 4 nuclear side boosters. We're going to actually make those with 3 of the MK fuselages because I wanted to give you guys as much fuel as you could possibly need. I live streamed this ship a few days ago, only using 2 on all 5 engines, and we made it there and back no problem. I wanted to give you guys the extra fuel just in case you needed it. Now, you notice there's parachutes on top of the lander can. That's the nice thing about Doudna is you can use parachutes to land on it. It's one of the easiest places to land, in my opinion. If you don't have an engineer, biome hopping can be a bit difficult because you need an engineer, at least level 1 engineer, to be able to repack those chutes. So if you can find a way to get 3 Kerbals in a command pod up there, like if you have the DLC, you can use that cosmonaut pod and bring a engineer with you. You can biome hop a little bit. In fact, you should be able to do 2 biome hops, reorbit. If you have the fuel reserve, you can refuel, go back down to Doudna, and hit 2 more biomes before coming back up and getting ready to go to Ike. That's totally up to you. Now, the next part of this is going to be a real basic booster. We're going to basically mimic the Falcon Heavy by doing 3 of the same base boosters side by side to each other. But we're going to have the 2 outside boosters feeding fuel into the center tank, which was the original Falcon Heavy design, but it's really complicated to do that in real life. But this is Kerbal Space Program, so let's do it. This is just so we can get some extra power because this is a very heavy payload. Get it off the launch pad and get it over that 10K mark before we separate these boosters. And then we can go ahead and start doing our normal ascent to get into orbit. You'll actually notice that I'm a little more vertically aggressive on my launch. It was just because I was trying to get a little higher into the atmosphere where it's a little bit thinner, so that skipper stage had a chance. Because if you're not high enough in the atmosphere when you hit that skipper stage, the thruster rate's so low that you'll have issues getting into orbit. But unfortunately, since these are the most powerful rockets we have, this is kind of what we're stuck with. Once you unlock the 3.75 or for the DLC, the 5 meter, the Saturn V parts, this rocket becomes real easy to get off the launch pad. But since we're only using those 2.5 meter parts with such a heavy payload, we're a little restricted. Now, you notice I'm using a lot of struts as well. Like, you want to go ahead and do that because the struts, they're very important. They keep the ship from wobbling apart. And the ones I did between the side booster tanks on the nuclear stage, you need those there because nuclear engines have a terrible thrust to weight ratio and their burn times are super long. I use ×4 physical time warp during all of my burns, and I use times 4 in post-production for all of these burns, and they still take a little bit of time. Just a little bit of a heads up. Now, before we launch, we need to make sure we're in a Doudna transfer window. I was already pretty much in one when I did this flight, so I just loaded up a new save to kind of show you how to do this if you're not. But you're just going to go into the tracking station and time warp until Doudna is... Sorry, kerbin to the sun to Doudna is about 45 degrees. And what I mean by that is if you draw a line from kerbin to the sun, from the sun to Doudna, it should be about 45 degrees. I'm going to actually put a picture up here in a second with 2 lines explaining that a little bit better. Well, this is the Doudna transfer window. There's actually a photo I have hung up on my wall I got from Reddit that has all of the planets on a map with their retrospective angles. I recommend looking into that because it's a lifesaver. In fact, I have the Delta V requirements written next to all the planets in there too. That way I don't have to look any of it up. I can just look over and I have the paper just literally taped to my wall right there. So we're going to go ahead and do the launch. Again, you're going to notice I'm going to be pointing a little more straight, staying a little bit more towards the pointing up until we get close to that 10K mark before I start to tip over. In fact, we get there a little bit closer to 11.5 to 12K. That's again just to get a little higher out of the atmosphere before we ditch those boosters. And basically once you get to this point, I'm pretty aggressive when it comes to this because again I want to have the nuclear stage have as much thrust away as I can to finish circularization. I want to be out of the atmosphere when that kicks in, and I still want to be at the 80K mark. So I start turning over a little bit later and I follow the prograde marker for the most part. I stay a little bit behind it just to kind of push the top of my orbit up a little bit before I kick into the skipper stage. You can do a normal descent. This is just how I like to fly these underpowered rockets. It's just a personal preference. You have enough Delta V to do it either way. Now, once you get to... Basically, once the skipper stage is blown, you're going to kick it off, and you're going to use a nuclear stage and get yourself up to that 80K mark for your orbit. And I'd actually recommend pushing a little flat if you can to give yourself a little more time before you get to the top of your orbit, purely because, again, these burn slow, and if you're not very fast at making maneuver nodes yet, like I think I had like 40 seconds before my burn was up when I made mine. And I've been doing these a while, so I can make my maneuver nodes fairly quickly to get into orbit. If you can give yourself a little bit more wiggle room, I do that. But let's get to the transfer part. I slowed most of this down. Now we're going to zoom out. We're going to set Doudna as a target like we did with the Mun or did with Minmus. And then you're going to make the maneuver node pretty much to the south side of the planet. Like if you zoom back out, Doudna would be a little bit northeast-ish from where we're at. You want to put it right about there and pull it out to about 12,000 meters a second. This is not the most efficient way, but this is the easiest way to do this, which is what I wanted to focus on today, was the easier way to do this. Then you're going to kind of just drag that center marker back and forth a little bit. You'll see those 2 little triangles meet up. Again, I sort of overshot this a little bit on my transfer window, so I'm going to have to do a little bit more correction. So if you get a little bit closer to that 45 degree mark, this won't be as bad for you. But just kind of adjust your retrograde and prograde back and forth a little bit and just move that back and forth until you see the little ghost image pop up, which you'll see here in a second. I was also using my mouse without a mouse pad because I spilled water on my mouse pad, and my mouse movement was super jerky. Hopefully you don't have that problem because this took me a little while to actually get that encounter. Now this is going to be a really rough encounter, which is all we need. We just need a rough encounter. I'm actually going to show you right here what I mean. Like, we're not very close to the planet, but we're within its sphere of influence. That's all we need. Now typically I'd recommend doing this over 2 burns to save fuel, but again, I packed so much extra Delta V into this thing, we don't need to. If you'd like me to go over what I mean by 2 burns, I can make a separate video just based on that, using the same design, and just go to Doudna or whatever and just show you guys what I mean by splitting your burns into 2 burns. It's an efficiency thing. It has to do with the Oberth effect, which we're going to actually talk about here in a second. But I'm going to shut up and just get back to this real quick. Sorry. Just keep burning until you get to the end of that node. And slightly puff until you see that solid yellowish line come into view around Doudna. You just need to get it to where it's in the sphere of influence. You don't need to get it perfect. We're going to make a correction burn about halfway there in deep space because it's cheaper. We're going to go ahead and mess with normal and anti-normal just to kind of get the plane exactly where we want it, and then prograde and retrograde. You should not need to touch anything else. So normal, anti-normal, prograde, retrograde. Just mess with those a little bit until you get a periapsis of around 60,000. Now, Duna's atmosphere starts at 50,000, and you can aero brake at Doudna if you want to. I'm not trying to go over that right now. I'm trying to give you guys kind of the simplest, easiest way to do this. And we have so much delta V in the ship, it's not funny, actually. So we can stop with our engines. It's totally possible. But because these have such a low thrust to weight ratio, and because they take so long to do the burns, we're actually going to split our burn to circularize around Doudna using the Oberth effect. Now, if you see right here, it's going to get really touchy. So I'm actually going to shut down my 4 outer engines. I have them hotkeyed. That's up to you. And then I'm going to try and just do it with the center engine. In fact, it's still a little too much. So I'm going to turn down center engine's thrust to basically where it's at like 10. And then just make really small retrograde and prograde adjustments until I have my periapsis exactly where I want it. It's the easiest way to do this is just turn that throttle down and just do super small puffs until you get it exactly where you want it. You'll notice there's no RCS on this ship, and there's a reason for that. You do not want to use your RCS in deep space. It sounds weird, but even though it's such small puffs, it will still move your ship, and any movement of your ship will cause the line, like where you're going, where you're currently at, it'll cause that to move. So if you use RCS to like turn around, you'll see that line start to move. It doesn't take a lot of force. Now, as you see here, I set up a node just to where I had an orbit. In fact, I stopped it a little earlier. I'm not sure if you saw, but to circularize around Doudna, it'd be just shy of 2,000 meters a second. The Oberth effect states that burns are more efficient when you're closer to the surface of the planet. So we're going to use that to our advantage. We're going to do our first pass until we get just barely circular, well, not even circular, we're just going to get the orbit, very eccentric orbit. We're just going to keep burning, and then as soon as we see that blue circle, we're going to cut our throttle. And the reason for that is we're going to come back around and do another retrograde burn to circularize, and it's going to save you between 100 and about 150 meters a second of delta V. It's not a whole lot. Especially, I mean, if you actually do this over like 3 passes, that'd probably be a lot cheaper, but we have the Delta V for it. I just kind of wanted to show this technique off, just to kind of show you guys how to use the Oberth effect. I haven't really talked about it on this channel, I've noticed. I'm not sure why I haven't, but I haven't. Something else that I wanted to talk about too that I totally spaced on talking about really early in the series, and I'm sorry about that, that's my fault. But console players, you do not have the advanced maneuver node maker like I do, the advanced burn time. When you do your burns, when you set up your maneuver node and do your burns, let's say you have a minute-long burn. You need to start burning 30 seconds before and 30 seconds after. You want to basically split your burn time in half where the node is. I was talking to someone earlier, it was actually 2 days ago, and I guess he started his burns as soon as he got to the node, and that's not how you do it properly on console. Unfortunately, you don't have that third line that tells me exactly when to start burning, and I'm sorry I didn't bring that up before. I've had the luxury for so long, I've actually forgotten about it. So hopefully that helps some of you guys out who are still having issues getting into orbit. I actually went back and told a few other people that I was coaching early on before I did this series. But let's get back to the video. I'm just doing some science real fast because I'm close to the surface of Doudna. You could stop your time warp and do it from high above the surface, but when we do our Ike transfer, I just do it then. That's just how I usually do it. I focus more on getting circularized, and then I go ahead and do the rest of it. But now it's time to get rid of all of our dry mass. Those 4 outer tanks, they have no fuel anymore from this journey. So they're just dead weight. So what we're going to do is we're going to burn retrograde and drop our periapsis down to about 35-ish thousand, give or take. You want it to be at least 10k lower than the 50k mark. And then we're going to deattach those tanks. We have them staged to get rid of all 4 of them. Now, what that's going to do is get rid of all this extra dry mass, and it's going to give us more delta V and a bit better thrust to weight ratio. Then we need to flip prograde pretty much immediately and start burning again to recircularize our orbit. That's basically just going to put those 4 tanks on a collision course into the surface of Doudna, so they're not just floating out in space. If you're not worried about space junk, just let them go off. That's up to you. Now, once we get to this point, we're going to go ahead and set up our lander. Now I just want to show you something real here. You see how much delta V we gained after we detach that lander? We're back to 3,000 meters a second without that lander attached. Just wanted to kind of show you that. But we're going to go ahead and get the lander out of the way. I want to make a quick maneuver node to make a predicted path. You can kind of land wherever you want. I usually aim for the darker spots at the bottom of the hills because they're usually flatter. Or those that canyon you see. If you land up on the edges, they're pretty flat up there too. Doudna isn't as bad as the Mun, in my opinion at least, for hills. In fact, if any of you guys saw the trailer to this video, that was from an outtake where I did land on the hill. I went back and I re-landed into a different spot to kind of show you guys how to pick out a flat landing spot. We'll get zoomed in real close to this so you can see it. But you can actually see from the map view kind of where that hill ends because the shading gets one color for a little bit and then it gets lighter again. That's the center of the valley. Now you're also noticing I'm doing some experiments in the upper atmosphere of Doudna. Now I'd recommend doing this when you're closer to the 40k mark. I was being a little rambunctious and a little overzealous the time warp because you're going to be going slow enough and you won't have the heat to deal with that high in the atmosphere. You can run the experiments, hop out with Bob, reset them all, and you want to do that because right before you land, you can do the experiments again to be just over the surface of Doudna, and then once you land, you can do landed on Doudna. So that's 4 sections you can grab science from. Just above, upper atmosphere, just above the surface, and then on the surface. So right there, that's 4 sets, and if you get the high above, that's 5 sets of data. That's a lot of science. That's how we're able to get so much science points from this mission. Now, you don't have to hop out like I do, but once your parachutes are deployed, you're going slow enough to where you can actually hop out with Bob and grab all the data and reset it before you land. I just hopped out and did an EVA report real fast and grabbed the crew report out so I can reset it. And then once I land, I'm going to go down, grab all the data, hop back in, and then run it. It's a little bit safer to do it that way. But you basically use the parachutes to get your speed down, and then once you get to the surface, just like on the Mun, bleed off most of your speed and just lightly coast to the ground and land. This lander has a decently wide base. It's very fuel heavy and it's very bottom heavy, so you shouldn't have to worry about tipping on this one. You see here I'm just grabbing all the science real fast. I'm going to hop back in the cab, hit the 5 key, which is my shortcut key, rerun the experiments. Now I've officially gotten 4 sets of experiments just from being at Doudna for a little bit of time. That's probably close to about, I'm going to roughly say about 2,000 science. Now we're going to hop out, we're going to plant the flags. You don't have to bring out both kerbals. I wanted to test something because I wasn't 100% sure if they change this or not. I'm also wanting to show you can use your EVA packs on Doudna in case you forget to put a ladder on there. You can use EVA packs on Doudna. Eve you can't, Kerbin you can't, but Doudna and lunar planets you can. The atmosphere is thin enough and the gravity is low enough. You can use an EVA pack when you're on Doudna. We're going to plant our flag real fast, which I actually plant 2 flags here because I wanted to see if it actually changed the experience amount doing the flag thing still and actually getting out and touching the surface. It doesn't. So when we go to Ike, I actually don't let Jeb get out of the ship because once we land on Ike, once our ship hits the ground on Ike, Jeb levels up to level 4, and so does Bob. And they don't get any difference in experience. I just wanted to see if you still got the extra 2 experience from actually getting out of the ship. I don't think you do anymore because it doesn't look like you do anymore. That's why I brought both of them out for this little part right here. I'm going to go ahead and hop in the ship and we're going to get ready to go ahead and re-rendezvous with the mothership. This will not be the same as doing this on the Mun or Minmus. And since we don't have a booster stage, it'll be a little different than Kerbin. Now, Doudna is very forgiving. The gravity isn't that bad. But you're going to notice I'm going to be pointing pretty straight up for the first part of this descent. Basically, once I clear that first atmospheric line, I'm just going to follow prograde until I get those markers. And then depending on where my markers are set up, I'm going to start my burn from there. You could actually start burning towards the prograde marker about 3,000, or actually probably closer to 2,500 meters above the surface if you wanted to. I, just trying to get out of the thicker parts of the atmosphere before I started doing my horizontal speed. So you don't have to follow this path. It works. That's how I've always gotten off Doudna. That's how I like to do it. It's a little faster in my opinion, but you have plenty of fuel either way. You still have over 2,000 meters of delta V after you detach the legs. Just keep that in mind. Now, again, we're just going to kind of watch for those 2 little targets to meet up with each other. I'm going to go through this part kind of fast because it's the same thing as rendezvousing around Kerbin pretty much. It's actually a little easier than doing kerbin. And then I'm just going to go ahead and make a maneuver node at the top of my orbit, get it lined up as close as possible. Once I get close up to the target, burn retrograde relative to the target, bleed off all my speed, burn towards the target, and rinse and repeat that a couple of times as needed until I get a nice close encounter, and then we'll go ahead and dock the ships together. Now, the reason I brought that fuel reserve in the beginning of the video, we're going to go to Ike and we're going to land on Ike. But I was, again, since I used a little extra delta V getting off Doudna because of the way I like to get off Doudna, I underestimated how much delta V I actually had, even though this thing is pretty overbuilt. I knew it was overbuilt, so I was being kind of lazy, and that's on me. Well, because of that, having the legs on the lander makes the dry mass too high, so you can't actually land on Doudna and leave. So I actually land on, not Doudna, I'm sorry, land on Ike and leave. So I'm actually going to land on Ike without the landing legs. It's totally possible. There's no atmosphere. The gravity is low enough. You can just land on the engine if you burn all your speed off and land very slowly. It's 100% possible to do it. I wouldn't recommend trying it if this is your first time. If you end up in the same position I'm in and you still want to try to do an Ike landing, just use quick saves and try it a couple different times. If you can find a flat enough spot to land, you can do it without the landing legs. In fact, I circled the planet about 5 or 6 times to find the perfect spot. I also hit the wrong button here and almost screwed up my entire docking. We fixed it. Ignore that. I like to leave my mistakes in videos. They show that people make mistakes. Anyways, we're going to get ready to go over to Ike now. Now, getting to Ike is the same thing as going to the Mun. Sorry, I threw in all the data in the main cab real fast. That's just something I do. So we're going to be going to Ike. It's the same thing. We're going to go ahead and set Ike as the target. We're going to make a maneuver node, pull it out a few hundred meters until it pretty much... in fact, I pulled it a little high. You want to just get it to where it intersects the orbital line of Ike, and then kind of move it around until you get a nice orbit. I knew I was going to be low on fuel, so I wanted to make sure I was coming around the planet and the way it spins. It's not that big of a difference, but if you launch off a planet with its rotation, you get a little kick of delta V, or a little kick of speed when you reach a certain level of speed. That's why when you launch off kerbin, you go 90 degrees, not the other way. You go with the orbit of the planet. You're going to notice here I'm just getting a rough encounter. I'm going to do a small correction burn. Ike is a very flat planet. I'm going to set my periapsis to be about 15k. Partly because, again, I don't have a fuel reserve, and I knew I was low on fuel. And two, because you can actually get just around 10,000 meters. I want to say it's 10,200 meters from the surface of Ike and not hit anything. Like, that's how flat Ike is. Very forgiving, and you can get very, very close to the planet when you do your initial orbit. That way you need less fuel to get back up into orbit and re-rendezvous with your ship. But we're going to go ahead and just do our correction burn. Now, you notice I'm running some experiments here. This is just to get the high above Doudna. And I'm going to stop and do it again once we get a little closer to Ike, because I want to get high above Ike and low above Ike. Now, unfortunately, Ike doesn't have an atmosphere, so we can't get the upper atmosphere data from Ike. We can only get high above, low above, and surface like you do with the Mun. And you'll see that we do this here, actually. We're going to go ahead and slow down our time warp, run the experiments once we're high above Ike, reset them, get our orbit set up, circularize, run the experiments again, and then we're going to go ahead and do the landing with Ike before we rendezvous, and then we're going to go ahead and get back home. Now, this video is very long, so I'm sorry. I tried to cut it down as much as I can without leaving anything important out, but I wanted to also slow down certain parts of this video that we haven't gone over before so you can see it in real time, or mostly real time. So it's a little easier to understand. That's the one thing I hate about watching some tutorials. I speed through a lot of this stuff. The stuff I speed through are things we've gone over. Doing the initial descent, we've gone over that. But I slowed down towards the end to show you how to use the parachutes. We've landed on the Mun and Min-Mist. You guys know how to do a descent onto the moon, or you should if you're doing a mission like this. You know how to do an orbital rendezvous, or you should if you're doing this mission. We've gone over those in the last video, so I speed those parts up so these aren't, hour and a half, 40-minute videos. But I slow down certain parts just to kind of show you what I'm doing so you get a better understanding. So again, I'm sorry this video is super long. I just wasn't able to cut out really much of anything, even by speeding up parts of the footage. No matter how I tried, I barely got it under the 40-minute mark. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm going to start babbling about that. Anyways, now that we're going to go ahead and get closer to Ike, we're going to go ahead and get ready to do a retrograde burn to circularize around the planet. Again, I am very close to the surface of Ike. And if you may notice that our thrust weight's a little bit better now because we got rid of all those boosters. And again, once we get rid of the lander, like our delta V is going to skyrocket. And I'm going to show you guys the quick way to get back home, not the most efficient way, because you have to wait for a certain position of the planets, and it can take a while to time warp to it. And I wanted to get the Kerbals home, so I want to show you guys how to kind of force a kerbin encounter, which is why we have that heat shield, because we're going to be coming in very fast. Like very, very fast, like 5,000 meters a second fast when we hit the atmosphere. And in real life, this would probably kill someone from the G-forces. But again, we're in Kerbal Space Program. We can do this. Now, I'm just kind of floating around the surface looking for a flat spot. If you have that fuel reserve with you and you're able to refill your ship before doing this, I have the legs. Don't worry about it. The ship is, again, very bottom heavy, very widespread on the bottom. It can land on slope surfaces pretty well. But right here, I'm just going to go ahead and detach the ship. I'm going to go ahead and point retrograde and get ready to do my burn. As soon as I float away from the ship enough. In fact, you'll see here I almost kind of kick it with the legs, so I'm just going to kind of turn the ship a little bit. You notice I still have my landing legs on. I will be detaching those shortly. I'm just going to wait until I'm on a collision course with the surface of Ike. That way those also get blown up. But at this point, we're just going to kind of fast forward over to where about 5,000 meters above the surface, and I'm going to start to bleed off all of my horizontal speed. Again, I was running low on fuel, so I had to do this pretty efficiently. There's little puffs here and there to slow myself down, trying to keep it under 150 meters. And then I'm going to basically do something called a suicide burn, sort of. And then I'm just going to puff off of my speed and very, very slowly come down to the bottom of the surface. You see, I'm just kind of keeping it as low as I can, and then right before I get to the bottom, I'm just going to do a nice little quick burn, and then float, and then just a couple of big puffs, and then just very lightly throttle until I slowly fall to the surface, pretty much at like 0.3 meters a second, 0.4 meters a second. I was going very slow. Either way, that's how you land on an engine like a Terrier. The other thing is this, it does stay up. I wouldn't try smacking your Kerbals into the side of it. Use a ladder, because you can tip this over pretty easily. That's what the ladders are for. Like, usually like on Mun, if it's a wide base lander, I'll just jump on my EVA and just fly my Kerbal in the ship and just tap the F key until I grab it. You don't want to do that on this ship, because you can knock it over and then you're just in a world of hurt. And there's ways to fix that, but we're not going to go over that right now. We're going to hop out, grab our surface sample, do our EVA report, grab all our data, plant our flag, and let's get ready to get out of here. So the same thing as before, we're just going to go ahead and time warp until the ship is, well, behind us. I missed it a couple of times. Sorry, I was, again, a little trigger happy with time warp here. And then, of course, we're going to hit the wrong button too, and either way, we're going to go ahead and kind of point up for a second and then start burning immediately flat, just like Mun or Min Miss. We're going to pretty much be burning right at that line as soon as we get a couple hundred meters off the surface, because, again, Ike's gravity is very low. There's no atmosphere. You're going to get up into orbit pretty quickly. It's pretty simple. We get up to where we have our orbit matching up roughly with the main ship. We're going to make a maneuver node, draw out the prograde marker, get lined up as close as possible. We're going to run out of battery charge because I forgot to let my solar panels out. I do that twice in this video, actually. You'll see me do it here in a second again. I'm going to let the SAS recharge. I'm going to go ahead and do the maneuver burn real fast. And then I'm going to actually, once I get into orbit, I'm going to switch to the main ship because my lander officially has no fuel left. And we're going to actually use the main ship to rendezvous with the lander. Again, our speeds are very slow. We got a pretty good encounter right off the bat. It's not going to be too bad. So once we go ahead and get close to the target, do the retrograde, and then to target like we have been before. Please remember to pull your solar panels out, because for some reason I just totally spaced on pulling my solar panels out when I did this the first time. And when you burn the nuclear engines, they generate power, but you'll see, I'm going to lose SAS here in a second with the main ship, and there's a little thing that happens, and it's funny to me, but it can be frustrating to others. So just do yourself a favor and make sure you put those solar panels up. Now, we're about to hit that point that I was talking about. My ship's going to go all wonky and everything because I have no SAS control since I have no electric charge. And you can kind of get around this by just, again, I'm burning a little bit with my nuclear engine, and it's giving me charge, but it's not going to be enough to sustain this. So instead of letting them crash, I'm actually going to hop over to my lander here in a second because it has enough delta V to do a quick maneuver to slow itself down. And then I'm just going to go ahead and just reconnect them afterwards. So if you ever end up in that particular position, especially if both of the ships have a little bit of fuel and you're only going, a few, like half a meter a second, the best thing you can do is just switch to their ship, flip retrograde to target, and do a quick little puff to stop them from coming together. This is where it happens right here. As you can see, it just started to float away for no reason. It's because my SAS control was no longer usable, purely because I ran out of electric charge. I don't know why I forgot to open those. I'm usually pretty good about it. I was trying to get this film wrapped up. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning when I finished this mission, so maybe that's what it was. I was just getting tired. I'm not really sure. If you also noticed a slight change in my voice a second ago, it was because I knocked my mic stand over, but I didn't want to talk about that when I was talking about what was going on the screen. So pretty much from here on out, if I do sound a little bit different, I won't know until I check the recording back, but just a heads up, if I sound kind of weird all of a sudden, it's because I just knocked my entire mic setup over, and it was bad. And right here, I'm just, burning retrograde to lower my periapsis to where it will crash, make a collision course into Ike, and then I'm going to go ahead and deattach my lander, and then just burn prograde to go ahead and get back into orbit. Now, I'm going to go back to Doudna, because, again, with the Oberth effect thing, Doudna has a lot more gravity than Ike, so we'll have to spend less delta V to get back to kerbin. And again, we're going to be doing this the quote-unquote incorrect way, because I don't want to sit here and wait for the correct transfer window to pop up. You can there's actually a website. It's the trip planning website. It's the Kerbal Trip Planner. If you just put that into a search engine, you can find it. But again, I'm kind of trying to show you guys an easier way to do it, and since we have so much extra delta V, we're just gonna do it the easy way. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and just like I'd burned back to kerbin from the Mun, I'm gonna do the same thing, but instead of doing the 35K, I'm gonna do it above the atmosphere and do a retrograde burn, so I can go ahead and get a nice circular orbit. You having the eccentric orbit, sometimes depending on where you have to position your burn, it might make it a little weird for you to get back to kerbin. But we're gonna go ahead and zoom out real fast now that we're in a circular orbit, and we're gonna go ahead and make kerbin our target. Now again, this is the incorrect way, but just like coming back from the Mun or Ike or wherever we're going, we're trying to burn at something that's closer to the sun than we are. It's inside of us, inside of the orbit we're on. So we're going to be burning backwards. This pretty much the same exact way we come back from Minmus or the Mun. We want to make our maneuver node to where it's going to be burning pretty much backwards from the orbit that Doudna is making around the sun. This is going to make our orbit smaller, not wider. We do the opposite when we get to Doudna because Doudna is in a higher orbit than kerbin is. At this point, you want to drag it out until I usually start around 800-ish, and then I check it, and then I'll kind of move the prograde marker back and forth until we see those two little lines appear, those two little triangles, and then we're going to kind of just move it back and forth and just adjust retrograde and prograde until you get the encounter. We're forcing an encounter is what we're doing here. It's called brute forcing or forcing an encounter, or whatever you want to call it. But we're going to kind of just keep adjusting this back and forth until those two little triangles get closer together, and then they intersect, and you'll see the little ghost planet, which means we get an encounter. And like before, it's going to be a rough encounter. This may take some time. It took me a little bit of time to get the encounter too, because again, I'm forcing it. Just stay with it. You have a limited amount of time. You're just going to be floating around Doudna. It doesn't matter. Worst case, if you get too close to your burn time, just do a skip orbit and just try again. Now, once you get the encounter, we're going to go ahead and do the burn like we normally would. Usually, just like getting to Doudna, I'll cut my maneuver node off towards the end once I start seeing the line appear over kerbin, which means we need to go ahead and focus that as our target so we can zoom into kerbin. And once we do that, we'll be able to actually see the solid yellow line appear somewhere around kerbin's sphere of influence. That means we got a rough encounter. You can stop burning about there, because we still need to make a correction burn to get ourselves close to the surface of kerbin. You can do all of that from Duna's orbit, but you'll spend so much time making the maneuver node, it's not worth it. It's easier to just go ahead and make a correction burn once we get the rough encounter, which you're going to see me do right here. Now, once you do this burn, you want to aim your periapsis about 35 to 40,000. That's where I usually try to aim at. Any lower, you might come in a little too hot, especially since we're forcing the encounter. Our speed is going to be extremely high. Like, we hit the atmosphere at like 5,000 meters a second, which is really fast, like extremely fast. If done correctly with plane changes, etc., it's closer to like 3,500, and there's not much to worry about. But because there's two things. The first thing is because it's going to be such a high speed, we're going to catch an eccentric orbit around Kerbin, do a full orbit, and then come back down and bleed off the rest of our speed. So this will actually take 2 passes. I'm going to recommend you do a quick save as soon as you get the encounter where you want it. And the reason for that is if you don't get close enough to the surface and bleed off enough speed, you'll just keep flying off into a solar orbit, and you have to detach your engines before you get to this point because all of that's going to blow up. I can promise you at these speeds, the nuclear engine may survive because it has a really high heat tolerance, but those fuel tanks are not going to survive. So if after your first pass you don't quite catch the orbit, you're going to be flung out into space with no way to fix that. It doesn't happen very often. In fact, I've never personally seen it, but I've heard of it happening to people. So just a heads up, once you get your encounter, which you see here, I'm turning my thrust limiter down and just doing really minor burns to get it exactly where I want it. That's the easiest way to do it, since again, the maneuver node might not be exactly accurate. You might go over, might go under a little bit, but I'm literally burning at 1 out of 100 thrust with a nuclear engine. Like that's how touchy these burns are, and especially with console being a little harder to set the maneuver nodes up with the joysticks, it's a lot easier to just manually puff here and there until you get it exactly where you want it. Make the quick save, and then go ahead and just warp up. Don't warp too far. Warp to where you're going to be a couple 100,000 meters away from the surface of Kerbin, so you can get ready to do your deattachment. If you just spam the time warp, you'll stop when you hit that 70k mark, and you could potentially have a very explodey effect. So I'm going to do this kind of at the last minute because I want to give you guys some fireworks. You're going to see here in a second. I'm going to pop that engine stage off, and then I'm going to go ahead and turn retrograde. I get a little temperature gauge because again, we're going 5,000 meters a second, and everything's going to start blowing up. I like the fireworks show, so I figured why not. You can detach this earlier if you want to. You don't have to wait to the last second like I do. I just like the show. But as you see here, we're going to go ahead and just start slowing down gradually, and then I'm going to pop over to the map screen, and you're going to see that we catch a slight eccentric orbit. Then we're going to make another pass and then just fall down to the surface like we have been. Once you get to this point, you have pretty much successfully made it back from Doudna. So I'd like to take this time to thank you guys again for watching my videos. If you want to go ahead and like and subscribe, that'd be cool. It helps me out a little bit. I was originally planning on making this my last episode. At this point, I've taught you all the basics, but I think I'm going to do one more mission, and I haven't decided where I'm going to go yet, but I want to teach you guys some other tricks like aero braking and maybe gravity assist. I don't know if I want to touch on that or not, but there's a few things I kind of want to go over and show you guys a little bit more advanced stuff, just to kind of give you guys a little bit more knowledge of the game. But the whole point of this particular series was to get you started in career mode. See, 4,000 science. Almost 4,000 science. So, at this point, we've covered interplanetary, the lunar stuff, orbital rendezvous, getting into orbit. We've covered all of the basics. So, I think I'm going to do one more video just to kind of show some more or less just have a little bit of fun with it, since this has been kind of, bare bones. But either way, that's the end of the video. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you guys again for watching, and hopefully I see you next time.